The scorching sun bore down on Zahira's weary shoulders as she trudged through the dry fields, her fingers brushing over brittle stalks of wheat. The land that once promised abundance now crumbled under the weight of an unforgiving drought. Faris, her husband, stood at the edge of their failing farm, fists clenched, jaw tight. Betrayal lingered in his eyes, not towards Zahira, but towards the life they had built, now slipping like sand through their fingers. The forbidden love they once shared, a love that defied tradition, seemed insignificant against the suffocating grip of survival. At night, Zahira lay awake, staring at the wooden beams above, listening to Faris's shallow breathing. His silence was heavier than words, his resentment sharper than any blade. The romance that once bound them felt like an echo from another life, drowned by hunger, debt, and the palace's relentless collectors. She longed to reach for him, to remind him of who they were before the weight of their burdens crushed them. But emotional stories like theirs rarely had fair endings. The village square buzzed with whispers of another family losing their land to the caliph's men. Zahira's stomach twisted. Would they be next? Faris's anger erupted as he paced the small hut, blaming the taxes, the drought, the gods, but mostly himself. She swallowed her own fears and clutched his hands, pleading for them to stand together. But he pulled away, eyes dark. "Find a way," he muttered. A demand, a plea, or perhaps a betrayal of trust? Zahira wandered through the market, listening to the merchants haggle, their voices laced with desperation. The scent of freshly baked bread only worsened her hunger. She lingered by a Persian spice stall, momentarily lost in nostalgia. Once, she and Faris dreamed of trading, of building a better life. Now, dreams were a luxury they could no longer afford. Survival had stripped them of everything, even hope. One evening, a royal decree arrived. The Sultan's collectors would be passing through, ensuring debts were paid. Panic spread through the village like wildfire. Zahira knew what that meant. Families torn apart, homes taken, lives shattered. She found Faris sharpening his old blade, his face grim. "We won't let them take what's ours," he swore. But what could one man do against an empire? The weight of their helplessness pressed against her chest. She sought comfort in the moon's glow, but peace remained elusive. Their love was once a fortress, unshakable even in the darkest storms. Now, cracks ran through its foundation, widening with each passing day. The burden of desperation was turning them into strangers. She wondered, if given a way out at the cost of something precious, would she take it? The day of reckoning arrived faster than expected. The pounding of hooves sent shivers through the village. Zahira gripped Faris's arm, searching for a trace of the man who once swore to protect her at any cost. He looked away, shoulders stiff. "Whatever happens, stay silent," he ordered. But could silence truly save them, or would it doom them further? Then, through the dust and dread, she saw him. Sultan Malik, towering over the commoners, his robes glinting in the dying sun. Zahira's breath caught in her throat as his gaze landed on her. Something shifted in the air, something dangerous, something inevitable.
If you like exciting medieval stories, you can help us by subscribing, activating the bell, and leaving your like.
Zahira's pulse quickened as Sultan Malik's gaze lingered on her, unreadable yet intense. The village bowed in submission, but she stood frozen, caught in a silent war between fear and defiance. He was nothing like she imagined. His presence was effortless, commanding, yet his eyes held something else. Curiosity? Amusement? Or something far more dangerous? The air between them crackled, and for the first time in a long while, Zahira felt truly seen. A palace guard barked orders, scattering the villagers, but Zahira remained. The Sultan's voice was deep, almost bored, as he gestured toward a group of anxious merchants. They spoke in rapid Persian, their words muddled with frustration. Zahira, having learned multiple dialects from her late father, instinctively translated under her breath. It was a skill that had always been useless until now. "Come," the Sultan commanded, not a request, but a decree. Zahira hesitated, but what choice did she have? She stepped forward, the crowd's murmurs following her like ghosts. As she spoke in perfect Persian, the merchant's expressions shifted from distrust to relief. The Sultan watched her with quiet amusement, a flicker of something deeper flashing across his face. Admiration or calculation? When the deal was sealed, Malik turned to her with an offer she couldn't have foreseen. "You have a sharp mind," he mused, "and a face that belongs in finer places than this." The words unsettled her, but before she could respond, he continued, "Your family's debt is of no consequence to me. One night, that's all I ask." His voice was calm, but the weight of his words sent ice through her veins. Zahira's breath hitched. The crowd had thinned, but Ferris still stood in the distance, unaware of the storm brewing just steps away. Her chest tightened as Malik studied her reaction, a predator gauging its prey. He wasn't asking, he was offering her a way out. But was it salvation or damnation? Every fiber of her being screamed to refuse, to walk away, to run. But then she thought of their land, their home, the crushing weight of debt suffocating them. One night, and everything would be restored. One night, and she could undo years of suffering. But at what cost? Ferris caught her eye, nodding slightly, oblivious to what had just transpired. He had asked her to seek help. If only he knew the price. Her heart pounded as she turned back to the Sultan, her lips parted but silent. This was no longer about choice. It was about sacrifice. Malik smirked, as if he already knew the answer she hadn't spoken. "Think wisely, Zahira," he murmured, stepping away. "I don't make the same offer twice." As he disappeared into the palace gates, Zahira felt the world shift beneath her feet. Was she about to become the author of her own betrayal? Zahira wandered through the dimly lit corridors of her own mind, trapped in an endless battle between morality and survival. Every argument she crafted against the Sultan's offer crumbled beneath the weight of her people's suffering. Was love worth more than a home? Was honor greater than survival? She had always believed so until now. Ferris was waiting when she returned, his expression weary but hopeful. "Did you ask him?" he murmured, taking her hands in his. Zahira hesitated, her fingers tightening against his calloused palms. She wanted to tell him the truth, to scream that she had been given a way out, but it wasn't one he would ever accept. Would he still love her if he knew the price of his salvation? She tried to push the thought away, but it clung to her like a ghost. That night, she watched Ferris sleep, his brow furrowed even in his dreams. This was the man she had built a life with, the man she had fought beside. But love did not fill empty stomachs, nor did it stop the soldiers from taking what wasn't theirs. Sacrifices had to be made, but did it have to be her? Zahira sought answers in the stars, as she always had. But the heavens were silent, offering no comfort, no absolution. She thought of stories from her childhood, of heroines who had given up everything for their people. Had she ever truly understood their pain? Or had she only admired their strength from the safety of fiction? Now, she stood at the edge of the same abyss. Ferris stirred, reaching for her in the darkness. "We'll find another way," he murmured, half asleep. But there was no other way, only the one Malik had laid before her. Zahira traced his face with her gaze, memorizing every detail. If she did this, if she accepted, would they ever be the same? Or would the betrayal linger between them, unspoken but unbearable? Morning came too soon, bringing no clarity, only inevitability. Zahira walked through the village with lead in her bones, the echoes of her mother's teachings ringing in her ears. A woman's honor is all she has. But what of her father's words? A leader does what must be done. She was not a warrior, nor a queen, but she was a woman with a choice that was no choice at all. She found herself outside the palace gates before she could talk herself out of it. The guards didn't question her. They had been expecting her. The moment she stepped inside, a piece of her shattered, lost to a decision that would never be undone. Ferris had asked her to save them. Would he ever forgive her for the way she chose to do it? The doors closed behind her with a finality that sent chills down her spine. A servant led her through the opulent halls, whispering of silk robes and scented oils. Zahira barely heard him, her mind racing. Had she just saved her home or destroyed herself? The night passed in silence, yet the echoes of Zahira's decision screamed within her. Malik had been as composed as ever, his touch calculated, his words effortless. There had been no grand passion, no whispered promises, only an agreement fulfilled. And yet, when dawn broke, something within Zahira had changed irreversibly. She had sold a piece of herself, and there was no reclaiming it. When she returned to the village, the transformation was immediate. Their land was safe, the dead erased as if it had never existed. Neighbors marveled, some whispered, others stared. Ferris held her close, whispering words of gratitude against her hair. But Zahira remained stiff in his embrace, her body present, but her soul elsewhere. She had done this for him, but why did it feel like she had lost him? Ferris noticed the shift before she could even attempt to hide it. "What happened?" he asked one evening, his fingers tracing the edge of the table where Zahira sat, staring at nothing. She forced a smile, weaving half-truths, deflecting with vague words of the Sultan's generosity. But she saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. A seed of suspicion, small now, but destined to grow. Meanwhile, Malik had already moved on. He had promised Zahira only one night, and that was exactly what she had become. Just another night in the endless luxury of his rule. She had imagined, foolishly, that something had shifted between them, that her sacrifice had meant something more. But the truth was laid bare when she heard him laughing with another concubine, his interest in her already fading. Had she been naive to think she had been anything more than a transaction? Ferris's distance became unbearable. He no longer held her like he once did, no longer spoke of their future with the same certainty. She wanted to tell him the truth, to lay bare the wounds in her soul. But would it ease the burden or simply break them both? Was it love that kept her silent, or fear of what he might do? At night, she dreamt of the past, of stolen kisses under the olive trees, of whispered secrets exchanged in the safety of darkness. But when she awoke, those memories felt like they belonged to someone else. Ferris had been her everything. But had she just become a stranger in his eyes? The weight of it all began to suffocate her. She had saved their home, their livelihood, their future, but she had not saved their love. The betrayal was silent, but it lived between them, growing stronger with each unspoken word. She longed for the days when love had been enough. But in a world of debts and rulers, love was never enough. And then, one evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Ferris's voice cut through the silence. "Tell me the truth, Zahira." His eyes held the question he had been too afraid to ask. And in that moment, she knew there was no escaping the truth anymore. Zahira held her breath, the weight of Ferris's question pressing against her ribs. The truth clawed at her throat, desperate to be set free. But she knew, once spoken, there would be no return. His eyes, dark and demanding, searched hers, waiting, hoping for a lie that would soothe his worst fears. But some betrayals could not be hidden forever. She whispered the truth, and the world shattered. Ferris staggered back as if struck, his face twisted in agony. "You chose this?" His voice was hoarse, disbelief laced with something darker. Rage, grief, a love splintering into something unrecognizable. Zahira reached for him, but he recoiled. The man who once swore to protect her now looked at her, as if she were the enemy. Ferris stormed from their home, leaving Zahira standing in the ruins of what they had once been. The villagers had heard. Whispers turned to accusations and soon to condemnation. The woman who had saved them now bore the mark of shame. Husbands pulled their wives away from her. Mothers whispered warnings to their daughters. She had given everything for them, and yet she stood alone. But loneliness was not the worst of it. The Sultan had forgotten her, moving on as easily as one discards a worn-out garment. What she had traded for survival meant nothing to him. She had been a moment, a fleeting indulgence, and nothing more. The betrayal was not just hers. It had been Malik's all along. Ferris did not return, not at first. But Zahira heard the rumors. He had joined the rebels in the eastern mountains, his name spoken in hushed, fearful tones. He had turned his pain into vengeance, and the target of his wrath was none other than Malik himself. Years passed, and fate wove their paths together once more. The great palace hall loomed before Zahira as she was summoned, not as a beggar, nor a wife, but as a witness. The man she once loved now stood before the Sultan, battle-worn and unbroken, accused of treason. The moment their eyes met, the past crashed between them like an unforgiving tide. The love they had once shared was gone, burned away by betrayal and time. What remained were only echoes, memories that refused to fade. Zahira wanted to speak, to tell him she had never stopped loving him. But as she opened her mouth, she saw it in his gaze, the acceptance, the finality. They had both lost something they could never reclaim. The guards seized him, and as they dragged him away, Ferris spoke only once. Was it worth it? His voice was steady, but Zahira heard the sorrow beneath it. She had no answer, only silence. Because in the end, the cruelest truth was that some sacrifices were never enough.